Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Chills at Will podcast. Been trying to get this dude on for a minute, so it's really cool to talk to Michael Torres. A little bit about him. He's a VONA Distinguished Alum and CantoMundo Fellow. In 2016, he received his MFA in Creative Writing from Minnesota State University, Mankato, was a winner of the Loft Mentor Series, received an Individual Artist Initiative grant for the Minnesota State Arts Board, and was awarded a Jerome Foundation Research and Travel Grant to visit the pueblo in Jalisco, Mexico, where his father grew up. In 2019, he received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Loft Literary Center for the Mirrors and Windows program. A former artist in residence at the Camargo Foundation in Cassis, France, as well as a McKnight Writing Fellow, he is currently a 2021-22 Jerome Hill Artist Fellow. His first collection of poems, an incomplete list of names from Beacon Press 2020, was selected by Raquel Salas Rivera for the National Poetry Series, named one of NPR's best books of 2020, and was featured on the podcast Code Switch. His writing has been featured or is forthcoming in Best New Post 2020, The New Yorker, Poetry, Plowshares, Smartest Pace, Los Angeles Review of Books, Georgia Review, The Sun, Waterstone Review, Southern Indiana Review, Ninth Letter, Poetry, Northwest, Copper Nickel, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Tinderbox Poetry Journal, the McNeese Review, Miramar, Green Mountains Review, Forklift, Ohio, Hot Metal Bridge, the Boiler Journal, Paper Darts, River Teeth, the Acentos Review, Okie Panky, Sycamore Review, Salt, Wisache, online as the Missouri Review's Poem of the Week on the Slowdown with Tracy K. Smith. Michael was born and brought up in Pomona, California, where he spent his adolescence as a graffiti artist. Currently, he teaches in the MFA program at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. Woo! Man, you can retire off that, man.
I wish.
And you're still young. How's it going today?
It's cool, man. It's cool. Yeah.
Like I said, I've been trying to get you on for a minute. Makes it sound like you've been escaping me. We just scheduled down the road, and it's just
Yeah.
awesome to have you on, man. You're over in Minnesota,
hmm
and I'm on the West Coast. I'd love to know about growing up on the West Coast, about growing up in Pomona. I mean, it's a suburb of LA. Is that safe to say? Or I mean, how would you describe Pomona, and how would you describe kind of growing up there?
Yeah. I guess technically it is. It's like a suburb of LA. But it's the furthest town in the county, like of LA County. Technically,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
on
yeah.
the border, because right beyond us is like San Bernardino County.
Okay. Yeah.
So definitely, yeah. So we were definitely always like felt connected to LA in some way, even though it was like, when we grew up, it was too far for us to like travel to all the time.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up in a pretty like um majority like Mexican American or Latinx, or even like Mexican migrants, like
Mm.
community, mostly brown folks basically. And so in some ways, after I moved, I realized like what sort of bubble I was in
Mm.
at that point. But yeah, then that's basically sort of how it's like the composition of the place I grew up. And
Sure.
all of my best friends grew up, right down the block from me. And I spent like all my time as a teenager with them, hanging out, and I'm still tight with them to this day.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, as far as your relationship with language, like, did you, I mean, was it a privileged environment? Were you like having to seek stuff out because school wasn't cutting it for like what you were reading? Were you bilingual, multilingual, or monolingual, I should say?
um so I was told, and there's like video evidence in my fourth birthday, that I would like I would speak Spanish like pretty regularly. But like, I think going through public education there, like I just didn't end up speaking it as much and lost a lot of like my speaking skills. Like I could
Mm-hmm.
understand pretty much everything someone might say to me in Spanish. but then there's that layer of like self-consciousness that I
Mm,
might not respond in Spanish because I'm just sort of like embarrassed that I might mess it up.
okay.
So that's as far as like I just grew up mostly speaking English, and I think I should say as far as like literature and like the richness of words, like I owe my oldest sister Rose like a lot of credit for that.
Mm.
She is 18 or 19 years older than I am, and when I was
Oh.
coming up, so basically like an age she could have been my mother. So when I was coming
Mm.
up, she would like take me to her college Shakespeare class, or she would have me
Oh.
try to read like Beowulf when I was like 10 years old, you know, like that old English stuff. And so like literature was always like it was like foundationally there from when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And I like to read. And then I think for a long time, you know, in my early adolescence and especially like my teenage years, like I just kind of grew out of it. And
Mm.
I don't know, like I think I really leaned into like wanting to be cool and popular with friends, and like reading wasn't something we talked about or did, at least in those circles that I wanted to be part of.
Sure.
And so I ended up, you know, getting into graffiti at like 15, 16, and sort of that's how my sort of creativity was being used at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit after high school was when I sort of transitioned from graffiti back to writing poems. And there's like a few like different reasons like how that sort of happened,
Mm.
but I had left literature. But I think when I came back to it, it seemed very familiar to me because of
Mm.
all that I had done or my sister had me do when I was a kid, like including book reports in the summer. She had me do that when I was a kid.
Oh man.
I know I was so mad back then, but now it's like, oh, I get it now.
Uh-huh. Oh
Yeah.
wow. That's really cool. So like what was she into and therefore you were into? You said like Beowulf and Shakespeare, but like was she I'm talking on one of the recent ones about like the cool like the idea of having the older brother or sister or the older cousin put you onto that music, put you onto that literature. Like what what was she introducing you to that maybe you're still even into today?
Um, I think she just wanted me to read, but I remember at the time when I was 16 and I didn't want to read, and I think also I was like always wanting to be out and about. And so I think she just wanted to sort of connect with me in some way, but on like through literature. She
Hmm.
let me borrow a copy of Luis J. Rodriguez's Always Running, that
Yeah.
memoir.
Oh yeah.
And like, and she must have read it in like for a class or something too, because she had little notes in the margins. And I
Hmm.
think she told me, oh, you might like this because it mentions like Pomona is mentioned in there. And then I was like, oh, like really intrigued or whatever. Um, and dude, I like devoured that book. And it was like the first time I'd seen a book written by someone who like was self-describing himself to look just like me and talk like me, and his homies
Mm.
look like my homies.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't know if you know that book, but it's about this guy's life in growing up in LA as like a gangster. And like, I mean, I wasn't a gangster, but I grew up around a bunch of gangsters. And so like I saw them in that book, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, someone like who looks like me and talks like me can write this book. And I think that sort of that definitely stuck with me, even though the next couple of years of my life were like mostly still graffiti. Like that book like I
Sure.
held on to, and I would read it over and over like a few times a year.
Huh. Yeah, that's one of those books. It's not a slow read, right? I mean, if you're gonna read it, you just devour it because it just moves so
You,
quickly, right?
because there's so much like tension and drama in the life that he leads that like I just
Yes.
wanted to know like, well, what happens, like do his homies die, like real stuff happens, you know.
Right. What I mean, like I remember I didn't know if it's from the book or like from hearing him talk, Luis, but he talks about like how he had like the chin. He had like a maybe an injury or a scar or something where like his chin, right? And
Yeah,
so
they
that was
called him Chin.
right. So that was his nickname. That was his identity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And like I don't know. I'm not saying it very like extremely intelligently, but that's the idea of like, it's any attention is good attention, right?
Huh.
Sort
Yeah,
of. And I mean, he
yeah.
said it like I said more eloquently than I have. With graffiti, is it I mean, the psychology of it is like man, my name is on the freaking wall. Like what is it about like being noticed? Is it about like that your name stands out, that people know who you are, you have that rep? Like, what is it about graffiti that really drew you in?
For me, it was like trying to put up something on a wall that was like that looked good and that looked like it had like a certain craftsmanship to it and style. And like I wanted people, because there was like a couple different types of graffiti writers. There was like either someone who got up a lot and like put their name everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
or there was like someone who like put up a piece but it looked like really dope. And I wanted to be that person, the one that would like had something that looked really dope. And so just, and like it's for the community too, because like I don't think anyone outside of the graffiti community, like they'll see that thing and probably won't think the way we think about it. They'll be like, oh, this is like vandalism only, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it was like I knew I was speaking to a community who like cared about art in some way, and I was interested in the art aspect of it, and like, and I just wanted people to be like, oh, I saw your name and it looked really dope up there. And like I think because I should say that like um the high school that I should have went to, my parents didn't want me to go there because it was known as like the hood school. And so
Mm-hmm.
she sent me to this other school that was like a newer school and had better resources because it bordered like a really sort of rich neighborhood town.
Mm-hmm.
And things were cool like the first couple of years because I was like this skater kid. But after that, um, everyone, like when everyone was like turning 16, like 15 and a half, 16, everyone started driving cars and they started getting jobs, and like, or their parents started giving them money for nice clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And I had neither. And I mean, I don't want to say like we were broke, but like we just didn't have money the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I ended up just being sort of finding those people who were more like me, which were just these brown kids that grew up in Pomona, and they were all graffiti artists. And so like I was like, okay, like, you know, I could find my way. I could like sort of craft an identity in relation to what they're doing, which is graffiti. And I had already really been into like being creative. And I think it was like one of the only avenues where like being like creative and sensitive was like okay, at least where I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
because like, you know, these fools would like fight too. And I never got like in a fight, not really, but my art could, it was like passable, it was acceptable, I suppose. Whereas like I don't know, had I done something like been their friends but also been like, in the drama club or something, that wouldn't have gone, maybe they wouldn't have taken to me, or like just like um honestly just like homophobic stuff from back in the early 2000s. And so and I found I like sort of navigated my way into doing sort of what I wanted to do artistically, while also like having friends, who like didn't care what kind of car I drove, or if I drove a car, or if I had like the latest sort of like, I don't know, jacket or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The is it called The Art of Peer Pressure, the Kendrick Lamar song?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, pretty
That
sure.
that was one of them that you recognize in the acknowledgments as like it's like a muse or like a prompt for you. You said one of the poems was based on that. And so I wondered, I mean, it's a cool song for sure. Like I wonder about
Yeah.
like the peer pressure, like how much that was part of like the tagging crew, part of the tagging life. Like you doing things that you wouldn't normally have done by yourself, and maybe in positive ways. I don't know.
Uh, I definitely think um when you're in that group setting, you'll do things like there's peer pressure, but it feels less pressure because everybody's about to do it. Like, say there was like a Friday night and I would sneak out of my room, and then I would jump in a van with like, 6 or 7 other guys, and we would just go off somewhere and like find an empty wall and then paint our names or whatever. And like I think doing like just doing stuff like that probably seemed maybe risky, or where I wouldn't have wanted to do that solo, but like because it was
Mm-hmm.
like it with this like group, this sort of this group, then that it seemed like it was like fun and adventurous. And like I feel like part of that, but then there was other things that happened that like maybe I was like, I don't know if I should be part of this other thing. And so like I think that was what made me think of the Kendrick Lamar song, is because like throughout the whole song he's like driving around doing these things, and like it's basically like because he's with the, I think that's like the refrain, right? Because I'm with the homies, like everything is like,
Because I'm with the homie, that explains everything, right?
yeah. And to me, that was kind of like a way that I like totally understood where he was coming from, and I could
Mm,
see. And so that poem, I think it was Down, the one that's sort of written while thinking of peer pressure, was
mm-hmm.
because like in Down, it was just about like the speaker, who's basically me, like, are you down to do all these things? Like, are you down to like fight? Are you down to like roll with us wherever we roll, without us asking? And then I think with through graffiti, with those friendships, what happened was like a certain loyalty was formed that
Mm-hmm.
like lasts even now. And I think there's there's peer pressure, that's sort of like, that was sort of bound by peer pressure originally, to just be part of something. But once you've gone through something with certain friends, and like you are sort of, you're all loyal to each other because you've
Mm.
been through certain things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It if you weren't down, would you have been just like pathetic, just kind of like like sorry excuse, or would you have been like it would have been all good, like okay he just doesn't do that kind of thing?
um there's been at least one instance where I remember where I wasn't down, but I didn't really say it. And but they, like, one of like my, I mean, but my best, one of my best friends, he knew that I wasn't down. It was like the crew I was in was supposed to go like have a big rumble with this other crew. And my homie, like my best friend, knew that that wasn't my thing, that wasn't my
Mm-hmm.
scene, that I was not that person that if I got involved in that, I probably wouldn't fare well.
Yeah,
Right. And so like,
yeah.
so he was like, just stay here, just like, because he was like, we're gonna squash it, but just stay here.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those times where I was like, oh, he knows that I'm not like everybody else. And he's like, uh and then that too, like, even though there's all this like toughness and machismo, like, to me that was like, I think I didn't have the language for it then,
Mm-hmm.
but it's why I wrote about it in the book. But it was like, oh, that's like love, that's a form of love right there. And
Hmm.
I could feel it, I just didn't know how to express it. And I really just appreciated that. And so that is sort of, it's not just like the wild shit we did, but it was
Hmm.
also just like things like that that made me think like, okay, if you ever need me, I'll be there. Like that
Mm.
kind of loyalty,
Mm.
because you love me, and I love you for that,
Well, I love like I mean your art, which is often inspired by other art, music, poetry. Reminds me of other art. I'm thinking of like, have you ever seen the movie A Bronx Tale?
Yeah, a long time ago.
I'm thinking of him and the C or Caladro. He's in the car with the buddies, and he wants out, and he asks out.
Uh-huh.
They end up going doing something pretty extreme with like basically like a rate like a bombing, like a
Oh wow.
firebombing type of thing. But just the idea that he just wants out, and that's not his crew. And second is I had this one year where I was teaching where it was the thing. I mean, it's always a thing with high school students, but like where the girls would sign their whole name,
Hmm.
first, middle, last, maybe like mom's maiden name, maybe if they had like a hyphenated name. And it was just like, it just struck me as like just trying to be like seen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like here's my middle name, and there were some pretty cool middle names. It's like, okay, like I'm gonna remember that. Like making yourself memorable.
Oh yeah, people got in fights over their names all the time, and it was like
Yeah.
it was a very important thing. Like, uh, I think we could feel sort of the surroundings of like, in high school. I'm thinking of, we could feel like a greater society bearing down on us before we entered like an adult life after high school. But I think
Hmm.
there was this sort of invisible force that we could feel, whether that was from like principals or campus
Hmm.
police or whatever, so that we knew there was something, um, limited about us, and that we wanted to put our names there and have our names that last there as
Mm.
long as they could. And I think it was a very real sort of, maybe even fear, but also a very real desire to leave something behind, I think.
Yeah. No, that definitely came through. So, I mean, you have some great lines about like just about identity in the book, of course, an incomplete list of names. Quote, what did we become? This is a great line. What did we become but an echo we called the future?
Mm,
If, quote, if there is a home to go back to, I'm not sure. That was the year I was no one and I knew it. Just ideas of identity. And
yeah.
then, and then, like you just kind of said, quote, we name things because we don't want them to vanish.
Hmm.
Right. And it's like, oh man, yeah, so many great lines. How about
Thanks.
the idea of, I mean, how do you pronounce it? Is it Remek? Remek?
Yeah, Remick.
Remek. So Remek was your tag name, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like the idea of like Remek versus Michael, like did you I mean, you talked about being on NPR Code Switch and I got to listen to that one. I can't wait to listen. Were you, I mean, at school, were you like the goody two shoes, just doing enough to get by? Were you Remek at school? Were you Michael at home? Like, how did you balance those two identities or multiple identities?
I was probably Michael. I mean, during the years that I was like really doing graffiti, I was like Michael only at home. And
Mm-hmm.
then like whenever I left, I was Remick. And I just like I wanted to sort of form that identity and I wanted to totally be that whatever that was as like fully an artist. And like yeah, I just love that. It was something it was just something that I could be known for where otherwise I think I would have faded into some weird high school obscurity had I not found something for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. So when you kind of like, the seeds were planted from your sister and others, and you came back to it a little bit later. Like when you really got back into reading, I don't know if it was just poetry or not poetry at all, or what were you like really, what really like shook you up? You talked about Luis Rodriguez, of course, with Always Running. Um, what were some of the reads, or who were some of the writers who gave you thrills, gave you chills?
Definitely. So like I think the easiest like bridge for me from graffiti to writing was like Tupac
Yeah.
because I saw that he had that Rose that Grew from the Concrete collection of poems.
Hmm.
And that to me, like I was again, it was like a moment where I saw like someone who in one way was so very like tough and masculine and like, just like I don't give a fuck kind of like way of being.
Yep.
And then like, but in this book, he's being so tender. And like I just was like, oh, like I like that's just like it just made me realize how the many ways that could be possible. And I think hip hop was a huge influence along with Tupac and just like
Hmm.
listening to the stories that were being told in the lyrics and wanting to paint those sort of images in a poem. Like for some reason I poetry was what I sort of moved towards and like um yeah, and also like even though he's not really popular nowadays, but like Charles Bukowski was really important to me early on.
Okay, yeah, San Pedro's own, yeah.
Yeah, he just like he just he spoke really conversationally and he like
Hmm.
cussed and he was a California dude and like when I was in my early 20s he was talking about like the women he loved or didn't love and like drinking and I was like oh that's my life like even though
How
it
did he
wasn't.
know?
Yeah, but so like he was actually really influential at that like in that moment of my life of like barely like really getting into writing like I he was like speaking to me and I think he was a huge sort of influence and then I think from there I remember reading Gary Soto,
Oh yeah.
Elements of San Joaquin, and just I was like this dude could be like an uncle to me. Like I see what he's
Mm.
talking about and like
Mm.
the places he's writing about, like the kitchen. Like I've been in that kitchen, like
Mm.
I've seen that, and like those just things like that. Those writers basically were like the things that like kind of shook me.
Mhm.
Also, I was thinking too. This is sort of like a random one that I haven't like returned to in a while, but Albert Camus' The Stranger was so thrilling for me.
Okay, yeah.
It was just like the narrator just seemed like he didn't care. He was so indifferent, and he seemed like something like I could see on the street by where I lived, and it was just like
Mm.
I mean he would like that was I think that character was dealing with like aftermaths of colonialism or
Sure.
something, but like that was just, it was so odd and like, philosophical too. And I just was like, I was really drawn to that. I think I was really drawn to like big questions about life early on, and maybe identity, that like, so you picked up on those lines, that those like were really, and still are, like really important ideas for
Mm-hmm.
me to be thinking about, especially maybe even now that I've left that home and have a certain perspectives that
Yeah.
have added on. Yeah, those are some of the writers that early on were just like, they just like kind of drew me in and kind of shook things up for me.
That's cool. I think about Tupac now. He would be 51, 50, 51,
I feel like I heard like, yeah, he would, that it's kind of wild to think of him that old now.
right? He might just have a belly, you know what I mean, and just be like just like have a dad bod and just but
Dishing out wisdom, hopefully,
dishing out wisdom, and just like not living that chaotic life, but man, like good looking dude. He had the link with his mom with like the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
Just charismatic as all get out. So talented. It's like, man. Um.
I
So
know.
when you talk about like the period of time where you're reading a Rose That Grew from Concrete, like who's other hip hop? Like I'm trying to figure out your time period. Like was like tomorrow, I want to say May 3rd. There's after 24 years, we've got another Black Star album. Like, were you into like that kind? Like, who were you into?
Yeah. There was like a um it was like the Far Side and
Oh
dilated
yeah.
peoples, and then a little bit later on after high school was like Dead Prez.
Okay. Yeah.
Just like really like conscious rap, I guess, is
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
what they used to call it.
Uh-huh.
Tribe Called Quest was huge for
Yeah.
me.
Nice.
Yeah, just like just because like they were so they were they were saying some very like, to me, meaningful things for that I could think about for my own life, and then they
Mm-hmm.
were telling them in stories,
Mm.
and even if they're people from like New York or whatever, I could see that and it would make sense to me. And then like I know Far Side was like Cali, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like that was like really totally relatable. But it was like those like rap groups.
Yeah. I hate to get all old manny, but that was a great era, right? In
No,
our,
no, yeah, hell yeah.
that was a great.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I would say that was my day. Like I'm a little older, but in our day,
Yeah, or
man.
Jurassic 5. Remember
Oh, of
Jurassic 5?
course, of course. That's right. They
I,
had the connection with dilated pupils, I think, right?
yeah, I don't know if like, I don't know if if there was like that stuff was before my high, because this was like late 90s. No, this was
Mm-hmm.
like early 2000s.
Yeah.
But I just remember there was like a b-boy group at the high school, and like I was cool with them because they knew I did graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
And so but they introduced me to some of those, to like Farsight and all those, and like, and I was, and like do you remember that clothing brand Echo Unlimited?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Echo Unlimited, they would release like this mixtape, or it's called Lyricist Lounge.
Oh yeah.
There was like, they did collaboration with Lyricist Lounge, I think,
Yeah.
and then they would have like, basically to me it was like music to do graffiti to, because I remember like one time we used to go to this spot that was like a pretty familiar spot to us, so we didn't have to worry about getting caught. And I would take my headphones and like my Walkman and I would like play.
Walkman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude, like, and I was the CD player Walkman, and I would like listen to that Echo Unlimited album while I did my stuff.
I didn't know Echo Unlimited was connected to the Lyricist Lounge. Dang.
I think they did a collaboration where they
Branding.
made like
Okay.
they did like a some sort of like hip hop underground mixtape thing, is how they branded it.
Yeah.
But it was just like stuff like that, or um like old Eminem, like really old Eminem stuff when he was like on that underground stuff.
Oh, scam. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice, man. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. Tomorrow, I don't know. I mean, most Def's been out of the country, I think, for a while, whatever. But there's a new album coming out tomorrow with him and Talib Kweli. So we'll see, man.
I want to check that out. Yeah.
Right. So all right, so you got into high school, college, you got into writing. Like when did you start writing? How did you start writing? Did it come pretty quickly to you, pretty easily to you? Like when did you realize like either I'm good at this or like I want to do this for a living or both?
No, I sucked for a long time, I think. Um, I mean, I think I wanted to like what I thought were poems was really just like it was either lyrics with
Mhm.
end rhymes, which you can do that for poems, but it's not what I ended up doing now. Or
Sure.
as like I think I too thought like you had to use like big words. This was like
Mhm.
right before I was introduced to like Bukowski and Gary Soto. So I thought like I had to use like multisyllabic words in every line of my poems. And so
Right.
and I was rhyming and I think it wasn't until I took like an introduction to poetry class at community college. And I should say that I was in community college for 7 years. And so I think it was like year 2 or 3 when I was like early 20s, maybe, yeah, early 20s, like 2021, when I took that class and then I got introduced to Bukowski or Billy Collins or Gary Soto
Mhm.
and things like that. And then I was like, oh, I don't have to do it that way. And they're, they're sort of doing what the rappers do in that they're like, you know, describing and painting this picture and I got imagery and things like that. And like, I was like, I could do that. I can tell you if that's all it is, like, I want to try doing that. And then like,
Mhm.
I think that was the class where, um, I remember, and I had made a group of, writer friends in that class that like we started some club.
Nice.
And so that was really helpful for me to find community there because you know that's my writing community was only there. And then when I went home, I was with my homies who wanted to go to the club or wanted to kick it out in front of someone's house and drink, or I was at work full time at a mall where people that like you didn't talk about. I didn't talk poems with them. I talked lyrics and like bands and like rap, but not
Yeah.
the same. So it was at the community college. uh, but yeah, there was one night we had the homework assignment was write a poem based off of this writing exercise we did in class. And I remember just being out back at my house in the backyard, and I couldn't. I wrote the poem, and then by the time I was like done working on it, I couldn't tell if I had been writing this thing for 20 minutes or for 2 hours.
Oh,
Like time
cool.
just passed,
Yeah.
and I thought like it just felt really good to have done that. And I remember thinking in that moment like if this is possible, if I could do this for like the rest of my life, I really like to do that. Like I like the feeling of
Whoa.
having worked on the poem. I mean, dude, like it took me years. There was years. This has been like years in the making, but like
Mhm.
in that moment, I felt like that's what I want to do. Um, I also had a really supportive family who never was like, writing never gonna make you money or anything like that. Like they
Yeah.
were just like, okay, just go to college. Like they just wanted me to go to
Mm.
college. And so, yeah, but that was the moment when that I really loved the feeling of doing that.
Wow. Usually, I mean, usually that when I ask the same question, it's mostly internal, but there's usually some sort of external. But for you, it sounds like it was totally like I like this feeling is incredible. If I can keep doing this, then I'm going to. That's cool, man. Wow.
Yeah.
What were some of like the early publications and like I don't know, or people who encourage you and like maybe when you kind of were just like, it'll be a side gig maybe or whatever. Like who really kept you going or
Um, so there was this like really small literary magazines that like didn't really the way they bound their magazine was just like paper that was folded and stapled. But like I
yeah,
can't remember the names of those places, but like shout out to them.
totally.
Because they were like, taking poems from some 21, 22-year old who wasn't sure what the hell he was doing. But
Mm-hmm.
at the community college, there was a really good group of professors, two of them, especially Lloyd Aquino and then John Branningham, who like they've helped like they gave us space to have to create the community we
Yeah.
wanted. And so like I remember there was like when we were in that creative writing club, John Branningham, one of those days was just like, okay, today we're all gonna learn how to write a cover letter so you can send out your work.
Mm.
And that's basically how I learned like, okay, I have to create a bio. I have to say, what do I say? I have to say, dear editor, please, thank you for the considering my poems, whatever. I just didn't know anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
And he just taught us like how to do that. And he's like, I think he was like, he, in a way, it's like, maybe I always wanted to publish, but like, because he was like, made it seem like such a natural step for us.
Okay.
that I thought like, oh, he believes in us, and I want to, I'll if he's believing in me, like I'm just gonna keep going for it.
Hmm.
And to me, that was like early support that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Also, it wasn't like a publication, but I would go to this open mic every week in downtown Pomona. It was called A Mic in Dim Lights,
Hmm.
and it was a spoken word spot. And um, that's where like for the first probably year that I went, I would just sit in the back with my hoodie on and just like listen
Hmm.
to all the pieces. And then like I decided to like share my stuff. And then like I think right before I moved out to Minnesota, like I did like a feature there, and it was like so much fun. And I think like the way I write now, like one of my final stages of writing of my writing process is to like, or one of the stages is to like read the piece out loud, and if it needs to have a certain rhythm to it
Hmm.
that I could then imagine myself performing or speaking in front of an audience, and like
Yeah.
keeping them captured, if not with the story of it, but with also the rhythms of it. And I think I that was picked up definitely at that spoken word spot, because I could tell like, because there was people who come in and rap too,
Hmm.
and I could feel like if I liked something, it didn't matter who, it didn't matter to me who it was, but like I could tell like, oh, this person's dope, and then I had to think about like, why are they dope to me? And it was like the certain rhythms and the story, and like I was just trying to take notes, mental notes of like how it was working for them, and I always wanted to just, I don't know, just get better.
Hmm. That's really cool. You talk about moving to Minnesota. Like, I know now you work with the prison population. You're at the university. You're at the college. You're a mentor. You're a teacher. How did you go from student to mentor and teacher? Was that natural for you, or was that like, does that come natural to you, where you're young enough that you can identify and you also have the skills and the chops, so to speak? But I just wonder about that transition for you.
Yeah, I think that all happened when I transferred from community college to the University of California, Riverside, and I just like, fell into this really good group of like creatives, artists, and actors. And one of them, named Freddie Lopez, he really had this desire to have a mentorship group, and then they would go to like the local schools and like, mentor like the youth there. And like
That's cool.
when and I just ended up like becoming friends with these folks, and I really liked what they were doing. And like, and so the basically the kids that they ended up mentoring just reminded me of me, and I was like, oh, I
Hmm.
wish like I would have had this group when I was a kid,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
like it sort of started there. And then when I got to Minnesota, I ended up doing something similar, running workshops, with like, it was like an at-risk and homeless youth center. And like I did that through some professor that like, asked if I would be interested, and I had already had some experience. And I just kept building and
yeah.
building. And then when I met the folks with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, you know, it was easy for me to like sort of like interview with them, or like, for them to bring me on board, because I had that experience. And like,
Hmm.
and I mean, growing up where I grew up, I I think it was really important for the incarcerated writers to see someone and to be taught by someone who looks and talks like them, and like I've said, like I'm not a gangster or anything, but like they know by the way I talk to them, and the way like that I am just very natural with them, that like
Mm.
that who they are and the things that they've gone through are not new to me, are not unfamiliar, and do not scare me and do not intimidate me. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
And so like in that, there's like an because of that, like trust is a lot, and it's an easier road to make with them, I think.
Yeah. Such a good, so an incomplete list of names, high awards, so good, so many poems that I read it on Kindle in this case, but so I can't necessarily show you all the highlights. But when I get the hardcover books, the soft, it's got all the different little page, bookmarks and stuff in there. And I marked the heck out of that thing, man. And so
Oh,
one of the
thanks.
poems is called "Stop Looking at My Name Like That,"
Oh yeah.
which kind of what you're just talking about now, where it's like, hey, the ones I mentored, like they knew that I'd been where they'd been, kind of thing.
Hmm.
One of the lines is like, I mean, I understood the poem was to be like maybe somebody in Minnesota, just kind of like looking at you, almost like fetishizing you.
Yeah.
Quote, "Nothing in my life was crooked or broken." Something about no new to the area teachers. I love that one.
Yeah.
I me
Seen it in
comes
a
back,
movie.
right? It wasn't
Yeah,
wasn't wasn't Beautiful Minds, right? It wasn't Freedom
yeah.
Riders, right?
Yeah,
Quote,
yeah.
quote, "Yes, we had beds," unquote. Some about we went to zoos. Just the way that the title works so subtly with the material. And there's just this,
Hmm.
this great ending about like something about walking into the sunlight, right? And like and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hope and possibility. I guess my question is tied into like I keep getting poets who say I'm not expecting them to say no, but they're like, yes. Is the speaker of the poems you, like 100%, or no comment?
Um,
Is
it,
is it a is it a is it a hyperbolic version of you? Is it an exaggerated version of you?
it's it's like some version of me. It's like a mixed version of me. The way I've been thinking of it is um like now that I have kids, I imagine that like in the future, 10 years, 20 years from now, if they end up reading my work in this book, I think they'll say that's not dad, but they'll also be able to realize that they're understanding something about their father that maybe they didn't know. So it's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
aspect of me, but it's not me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that poem is interesting, the one that to stop looking at my last name like that, because to me that was like an aspect of me that was writing against a lot of the other poems in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like uh, I
Hmm.
had I had done this panel at this conference that was about like I was there to talk about teaching in prison, right?
Mm.
And the way that the people in the audience were talking about prison writers made it seem like that prison writers only care, or that writers students in prison only are seen as prison writers, or only will care about prison
Ah.
literature and prison writing.
Uh-huh.
And so I think I was thinking about like, how do I, and I'm writing all this like stuff about where I grew up in the hood, and like I love that place,
Hmm.
but also what if I wanted to resist it for one instance, like what would that poem look like?
Yeah.
And I think I would start like, you know, at something where you would, if you barely knew me, you would see my name and maybe you would think something. And I wrote in resistance to that. And like, I don't know if I've told anybody this, but like a lot of those things in that poem didn't happen. Like I never went to summer camp. But
Mm-hmm.
like, but the very end is a true image, like the one about stepping out into the sunlight. I
Mm.
think that was like it had to do with like making little paper boats for like when the sidewalk would flood. And I used to do that with my sister, and it was a very
Mm.
tender moment. But like, I think sometimes it's hard for people to realize how complex, like, you're, even if you grew up in the hood, like you could have these tender moments. Like we
Yeah.
weren't all like, we didn't, I think it's even in that poem, like we didn't walk out, there wasn't always gunshots, like, what I mean, there's like really beautiful things that happen. And I think that poem was just like, I just wanted to help complicate all the narratives that were
Right.
already going through the book.
Yeah, I like that complicate, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I'm a sucker for like the ending, the nostalgic ending or the hopeful ending. That's also like that's I don't know. That one doesn't necessarily have pain in it, but you know what I mean? That's just like I don't know, that hopeful ending
Hmm.
that goes back to when you're a kid. My favorite movie scene of all time is The Godfather Part 2, last scene.
Oh, which one? What happens in the last scene?
That's when he Michael just killed his brother,
Yeah.
and he thinks back to like back in the day when he was young and innocent, and it was happened to be the day of Pearl Harbor. And so it's just a juxtaposition, you know
Oh,
what
is
I
it
mean?
like the dinner?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? I
yeah,
got my own plans for my future.
yeah,
He
yeah,
says, and it's just, there's just something about that. It's just like so like just profound.
yeah, yeah.
Like when you were younger, when life was more innocent, when life was more less, less complicated.
Looking back on it now with how
Exactly.
things are. Yeah.
Different perspective. You
Yep.
have so many cool combinations of like all American Mexican. I think one was like Mexican American with Mexican imprint, like so you kind of similar to when you just talked about. What a great line. You said some of, like you're at a party, again, your speaker as at a
Yeah.
party and said something about the homies, and the person kind of laughed, and you're like, no, seriously, beer pong and bad jokes are ways of like, quote, disappearing.
Uh-huh.
And what a good line, quote, this is how you become an artifact with ears,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah.
Pachuco comes up a lot. Ideas of identity, quote, one of the poems is grandson of a Pachuco. I think it's just a shorter title. Quote, Mexican at home and white out there. I just wonder about identity throughout the poem, even not just Mexican American, but also like as a brother. And I really identify with your idea of being the little brother,
hmm
like always being the little brother,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
even if you're in a situation where you might have more power or whatever, right?
Yeah, you revert back to like the back in the day, but like your young self.
Yeah, so just I wonder just like how you thought about identity with like whether it's culturally, whether it's in the family setting.
Um, I mean, I think I wrote, I think identity just ended up being like the center of like what I was writing about, or what everything I was writing about revolved around, just because
Mm,
what I was so interested in were moments that seemed like opposites, kind of like what I said earlier about like, you know, being sensitive, but you're in this like tough environment, right? Or
mm,
me being like uh, a Mexican American, a brown person, a Californian, like in Minnesota, like
mm,
in this new layout. It was just like, and I think the identity idea came out of that because I'm always wondering like, well, where do I fit in? Do I fit in? Am I standing out? Is it
mm,
noticeable? Like, can I blend in? But at the same time, like, I don't want to be like everybody else. It's like
mm,
it's like ever complicated kind of thing that
mm,
I don't think I think after I don't know if I was ever trying to solve anything, but I just wanted to like put it all up there and sort of like look at it in different ways.
yeah.
But yeah, to me now I realize like how important identity, just exploring identity is like really interesting. And maybe that has to do with like, you know, this sort of resistance to a stereotype,
Mm,
because all the ways I think of identity make are like they complexify they they
Ooh, I like that
complicate.
word. I like that word.
Yeah, they complexify the situation for me, and I think I me and my speaker don't want to be reduced down to a single sort of idea
No
or a
doubt.
single identity, right?
Yeah. Some other great lines that relate, quote, memory is first an annotation for loss. I guess that's
Oh,
more about perspective, but that's a heck of a line.
um, sometimes I'm like,
Sometimes you wow yourself with the line. Is that what you're gonna say? I'll say it for you.
no, dude. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, that was a good line, but like, I should say that I think of myself, I think of writing as a very spiritual practice, and I don't, that's a good line, and somehow it came to me, and the poem moved through me. Like I did the work of sitting down and doing it, but like the that line came from literally, this is a change of settings in Minnesota, and like literally seeing the leaves when they land, and then it rains, and then the leaves get brushed away, but the mark of the
Hmm.
leaf is there. And
Hmm.
I was like, that is just how memory works. That like it first makes a note of what we've lost, and we've lost, like the trees have lost these leaves, but like the way I remember my homies when we were younger, it is signaling the loss of that time period, right?
Right.
I often tell people, like, for as much as I love California, I don't want to go back to California. I want to go back to 1996.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's true, man. Quote, the further away I am, the harder I look for home. That's bars. That's bars. Where the maps of my life have yet to tell me how brief I will be this light. This light meaning the opposite of heavy, but I think also probably the double meaning with light versus dark.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously a lot of these themes are mixed in identity and like this nostalgia for what was. Push is a poem that we have different parts where there's one with the mower, one with the wanderer, the street vendor, the Home Depot, and you're walking past some of the guys working,
Hmm.
mostly speaking Spanish, and quote, if I buy them bottles of water, what would my offer me?
Hmm.
And that one just spoke to me so much, that quote in that poem, just about like, where do I fit in on this, like, you know
Yeah, and also like the fact that like I am I am seeking community, but like I realize I also sort of know that it's not gonna work, and so that line is basically saying this is a transaction, and like as
mm,
much as that is not authentically communal, I am so desperate for some semblance of community that I will try still.
right.
And I think I do feel like I think I do feel like that whenever it comes to like a Mexican community, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel, and that's also like there's like under like subconsciously, or like it's things with my relationship with my own dad who came from Mexico, and me and him have like a just a lack of a relationship in some ways, because there was a language barrier, because he was a much more quiet to himself kind of man. He was
Mm-hmm.
never like a abusive or even absent sort of father, but he was
Mm-hmm.
definitely quiet around the house. And like, so I learned that the way we communicate is these, very tiny moments. Like if I'm washing my car and he comes out to help me, you know what I mean? And that
Mm.
we communicate through we have certain conversations that like represent everything else for us.
Mm. What was it like a stoicism, or was it just quiet?
Um, I think he came, he had like he came he was like working when he was in his teenagers, and he didn't like have a regular, adolescence. And then
Mm.
I think that, coupled with the fact that, and I'm only realizing this now that I've lived in Minnesota and my kids are going to probably grow up here, and not in California, there's like something they will never understand about me. And I think you can maybe magnify or multiply that in my father's case, who, realized there are connections that won't be made because his kids didn't grow up in Mexico like he did.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's maybe some sort of, it's almost I think for someone who's like a traditional kind of quiet man,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that, how can you put that to words, that feeling that like there's so much that you've lost, and there's so like, how do you even bridge that gap with your kids?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean that's a great transition. Obviously, masculinity is, ideas of masculinity is a big theme throughout the book. Um, in the foreword, there's a quote, there's a phrase, an ever winding tenderness.
Hmm.
Um, you know, you and the boys are doing donuts in an earlier one of the poems. The next few years of his life have already began to carve a cave. I love the alliteration there, carve a cave. And this idea, I think of men more than women, probably, right? That we kind of think like our life is on a certain trajectory, and sometimes it's like we can't change it,
Yeah, yeah, at
right?
least in like the traditional sense of a man. Yeah.
Yeah, in the poem Knuckles, quote, we chased our love yous with laughter the way you cage the air to catch a butterfly. No one told us that we move with such grace, or that passion didn't have to be violent. If
Mm.
I could snap, I would. I got you on your own poem. I got you in your own poem to go, right?
Yeah.
like you're hearing it for the first time. And down, which we may hear from in a little bit, you got I think there are three versions. There's down 1, 2, and 3. This idea of quote recognizing fists before the fingers did. Some of us had cement slabs for cheekbones. This you really did it well in a couple of the poems. This idea of like that, what a difference for a lot of us, right? From like 10 to like 16.
Mm.
And like, the 16-year-old is the hardened one. He's the one who's maybe cut in class. He's the one who, when 10 was just was sweet and innocent. Not that we become terrible people at 16, but just so different, and how a few years can harden us.
A lot
But
changes. A lot is like asked of us, I think.
a lot is asked of us. I wonder how much of that you saw is like expectation, or maybe what we think we need to live up to versus what the world is expecting, what our families are expecting from us. Like that hardened, like especially as men.
Yeah. Hold on real quick. This like light got messed up.
All good, all good.
Um, it was just like everywhere I went, there was a certain look. There was a certain walk that you had to have if you to like not just be cool, but like also just to not. You just didn't want to stand out, because if you stood out for the wrong reason, like I I've been talking about like all the ways in which I wanted to like find, a place, but like I remember a number of different kids growing up alongside me who like couldn't who couldn't like chameleon themselves the way I could, I guess. And like, dude, they got punked, and I did not want to be them.
Yeah.
And then, and I just, that was just like, I just didn't want to have a bad time in high school. I just wanted to like, I just wanted to have friends, and I just wanted to, impress a girl or whatever it was. But like, but I, these other, and when I couldn't be tough, I could be funny, and, or I could be like, I don't know. Yeah, but those dudes couldn't, and like they just suffered because of it, and I just did not want that. And if I had this form, this sort of tough, sort of exterior, then I did it.
Right.
And I just like but I also just surrounded myself with people who were actually down as fuck, and not it was not me.
I mean, so many good lines, these, from different poems, some of them, but like, how do you laugh through a mask? And you is emphasized. I'm like, all right, like I understand that to be a profound quote, but it's like it's really putting it back on the reader, right?
Hmm.
It's not how do you like everyone, it's like how do you?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. My speaker's like almost irritated at like having to do that. So I was like, well, how do you do it then? Like if it's like so difficult to like do this
Yeah.
thing, like how do you do it? Tell me.
Yeah. When the quote, when the world shrank around us, we punched walls to open it back up. Life was a dirge. This idea of carving our names into desks. What a beautiful beating. And then, man, like, what a great line. Quote, we were more mustached than our mothers could manage.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like a homespun saying from like the 1800s, but it's freaking awesome.
Oh, thanks. It felt like yeah, it was like I have like a distinct memory of like I was with a friend, and we went to the house of this other kid, and we were in middle school, and then
Mm-hmm.
like we went to his house, and he was like he talked to us through the window,
Mm-hmm.
and dude had to be like he had to be 13, 12 or 13, but he had like this his girlfriend or this girl with him in his room, and he looked like a kid, but he had like a slight mustache, and I was like suddenly trying to be like, oh, he's like a man, but he's like, because he has his like woman, or he has his girl with him,
Yeah.
but like he was a kid because he's just like me and my homie, and like
Yeah.
I was like I felt like I was a kid still, and it was just like, at some point you become something that like your mother, and I guess I put mother specifically because of the traditionally like tender sort of idea that they have towards their sons.
Uh-huh.
But at some point it just switches and they become something else and they can't manage it. They just don't
Yeah.
know how to wrap their minds around how to be, you know, how to like love their son in a way that their son will listen, like comply.
Yeah. In every language, right? Like, no, no es mijo, no es mijo, whatever.
Yeah,
In all the other languages, not my son, right?
yeah,
Mom's always just, you know, little that guy can't do any wrong until he finally does a lot of wrong. Man,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind of similar to when you talk about, like, I love this line because it was kind of like the opposite of tenderness, but also extreme tenderness.
Mm.
In down two, it was one of the homies basically said, "Don't talk like that." I think you'd said something, kind of tender, but
Yeah.
it was like looking out for someone. And then your line, kind of you above it all, the speaker quote, "We knew the cost of the briefest tenderness."
Yeah. Yeah. That was like, this is when I was like, so like, I am a mix of speakers, but these characters are a mix of different moments. And I have
Mm-hmm.
this memory of this, my same homie, Danny, when we were like, I had told him something like, I can't, when I was like 17 or 18, I had told him like, I can't really imagine what my life would be like. I can't see my life at 25. And he said like, in a very loving
Yes.
way, don't talk like that. But then that same Danny in another moment like told me to let him out the car so we could like beat up some kid, like, you know what I
Hmm.
mean, like it was just like,
Hmm.
and so like, and so in that way Danny was still fully, a man and not just sensitive,
Right.
one has to maintain a certain sort of reputation, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, not being part of the situation, but like I see the "don't talk like that" as like, don't talk like that around the others, you get clowned on. And don't talk like that also, like, hey man, like, have some hope, like, cheer up.
It was definitely to have some hope. It was just me and him, we were driving in my car, and maybe he would have said it like that if there were other people around,
Yeah, okay.
because other people might have clowned me, because when you're in a group you have this feeling like you could joke more or whatever,
Oh yeah.
or it's things are a little bit lighter, but it was me and him, just me and him. So I
Huh.
feel definitely in that moment he was like, I think because he's younger than I am, and I think definitely that was a moment where uh we almost had like a big brother little brother relationship, friendship.
Right.
And so I think that was definitely a moment where he didn't want to imagine me that, or
Mm.
didn't want me to think of myself and so lightly, I suppose.
Yeah. And I've always been so interested in the idea of, like, whether it's like the situation you describe or just like an older brother or whatever, like, kind of like, hey, I'm messing up, and I'm gonna keep messing up. I'm doing whatever, but I don't want you to get into this. You're too good for this. And I've
Hmm.
always been so interested in the person who says that, like, how come you don't think you're good enough, or like you think you're too deep into, it doesn't have to be, again, like crew or gangs or whatever, but it's just like this idea of like, nah, that's not for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it comes down to like what the individual thinks they have to offer the world, or what they have and is what they have that is of value. I've
Hmm.
had a conversation like that with with a different like best friend of mine when we were like 16, 17, and I told him like, I wish I was like you, like I wish that I could like, 16, 17. So I said, I wish I could talk to girls like you,
Yeah.
man. Like you just know how to get them. And then he said like, he's like, why? He's like, I wish. He's like, dude, you're the one that's doing good in school. He's like, I would give anything for that now or whatever. We must have been like 17, 18, almost out of high school.
Mm.
And like, it was like, it's that question of what do you find of worth
Hmm.
in yourself, like what do you, and in others, I suppose. Uh,
Dang.
I think we're asked, I think brown boys are asked to think about their lives, to think about the consequentialness of their
Hmm.
lives really early on.
That's deep.
Yeah.
See, I know there's an easy term that I can never remember. It's something like man child or man boy or something, but
Mm,
yeah, but I mean, there was kind of like recently kind of came back to popularity with like, let's say like Trump's kids, right? Like
yeah.
kids, right? The
Yeah.
like how like white men can like fail upwards,
Uh-huh.
right? And I mean, what's Trump Jr. He's still a kid, or Eric Trump. He's 35.
Yeah,
He's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
37.
yeah.
And they're still kids and they're still finding their way, and
Yeah.
like we're not asked to be, like you said, so consequential yet. There's time. Take your skip year. What do they call that? Take your
Your
I'm
your
talking about.
gap year.
Take your gap year.
Yeah. Not
Right?
us. Yeah.
There's no possible way I can say the best line because there's so many good lines, but maybe the line that kind of like sums up the collection the best is, quote, if I'm gonna be real, I am who I've always been, a boy seeking an orbit to align with.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Just I guess
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave that one alone. If you want to add anything, I'm gonna make it worse. I don't know if you want to add anything to
Um, nah, that one came, all those all-American Mexican poems came, those are my favorite poems in the book, I think, because they were so surprising and because they were poems that I didn't think were part of the book originally. And
that.
so that line and that poem, that all-American Mexican poem was like my favorite because it was the weirdest one. And it was, and then, but
Mm.
there was some really like, it's almost like I was turning so many corners that like a line like that would surprise me with how open and honest I was being about
Uh-huh.
myself.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'll say that, yeah, I think it's that little brother sort of syndrome. Like I'm always that little kid and I'm always like trying to just find somewhere where I can just be in circulation with everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
then like, however, however hard we try to act as younger, and however indifferent we try to act now as as adults, or even
Yeah.
apathetic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The as the speaker goes to visit his brother in prison, it's, quote, I smile, not knowing how to be anything but a little brother. I think we talked about it a little before, but it's just like
Yeah.
subtle, understated. But that line is one of those that will just resonate with me. When you talk about building community, like who's in your community now? I mean, I found about you through the great Jose Hernandez Diaz, and I know Sarah Borjas thinks the world of you, and vice versa, and Alan Chasaro, and
Yeah.
I mean the list goes on and on. Who's really moving you, inspiring you? I mean, who are you reading? Whether they're poets or not, like who's really pumping you up these days?
Um, I'll say, damn, there's so many. There's Willie Perdomo,
Mm.
Patricia Smith, both of their work I really love. Mary Shebist, uh, her collection in Carnadine like wrecked me. Uh, Folks that my like homies of mine that like are doing stuff right now that I'm really cool with. Some of them are Dustin Pearson, Paul Tran, uh, Emily Yoon. One of my colleagues who's a novelist, Chris McCormick, is just like, he's just a great writer, but also just a great professor and great like mentor. He's a great mentor to students, and like
Mm.
it's really great to have him as a colleague. Um, yeah, Eduardo Corral is another poet that I
Mm.
really admire. Another poet, Chen Chen.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I don't know. Those are the top ones that I'm thinking of right now.
I got you. I know there are countless of them. Yeah.
There's so many.
Yeah. Your bookshelves are overflowing. Hopefully you got a copy of an incomplete list of names. I'd love for you to read some if you're up to it.
Yeah, yeah. I could read. I'll read that first section of Down,
Okay.
and then maybe we'll get to the algae roll call, which both of them I hardly read, but I really dig.
Cool.
All right, Down, part one. By morning, all of us talked about the boy who got shot after school. So at recess, we found the computer lab to look for bloodstains, a chip somewhere in the paneling, and stared at the opening for long enough that it seemed to grow larger, a tunnel we might slip into before escaping as men we thought we could be. I made a fist, not sure what to say. Miguel said, that fool was down for his shit. He asked if I was down for my shit. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I was like, yeah. Yeah, he said, sock me then. My entire body gripped. He laughed, the bell rang, I laughed. One boy behind another like a row of knuckles, we marched into class, then out of childhood. It took years. Later, the Lambo doors lifted when Miguel's Accord pulled up, and a system bumping holler if you hear me rattled each window. We emerged 16, claiming new names on our tongues. Some of us had cement slabs for cheekbones, but there I was, chubby in baggy jeans like candle wax in the sun, soft over the road. I couldn't be loud enough. We looked at the pavement, sweaty with sunlight. Miguel said, the streets are hot. The homies jumped back in the car. I didn't want to be left. Inside, I turned my hat and stuck my head out, como un perro, waiting for someone to look at us too long. It got late outside. I yelled at the dark. My name devoured the air. Under street lamps, we glistened with rage. My mother didn't want to ask. When I got home late, paint covered the hands strangers shook at school the next day, saying, I saw your name up. That's down. They wondered if I could bomb their black books. I smiled into blank pages. I learned how to recognize a fist before its fingers did, how a fist produced a handgun for some. It was always summertime. Mornings after gunshots, moms gathered, tugging grandchildren to whisper in Spanish names of sons until their prayers collapsed like bones underneath a suffering none of us could know how to carry. They cried into the small rooms their palms turned out to be. Grandchildren asked for a few dollars for when they saw the ice cream man. Around town, everyone wore the dead boy on t-shirts where he lived in a photograph on his bike, his hand raising a P. Even in death, we repped the hood. His daughter was at the car wash fundraiser for his funeral. She smiled with a super pop. Father pulsed against her chest, a brave lie. So many lit candles were placed against the fence where he fell. A burning city. No one could reach the sidewalk. People in the street became disillusion's parade. I thought, what I know is death makes us neighbors again, and that funerals look too much like family reunions. When the world shrank around us, we punched walls to open it back up. We emptied beer cans after funerals. Danny kept talking his shit. Keep up, he yelled, until we were all singing in Spanish. Me too. Life was a dirge. I wanted to go home, but I was there. Someone passed around a pack. I was happier with smoke waving from between my lips. How do you laugh through a mask? More names into the soft dirt. Blood kept dreaming of shadow. More shirts with faces were made. Into the train yard, we ran with them, their faces flashlights. We washed and folded those shirts into drawers to keep the rest company with rose petals humming between the Bible.
That line, father pulsed against her daughter's chest, a brave lie. That the t-shirts of the one who was killed, passed away. It's like, oh man. When you
Yeah.
when you write that it was always summertime, is that like as in violent stuff always happened in the summertime, or like the world was always summertime? The world was always
Sort of both. Like it was just like it's always like for the most part it's like really hot and sunny in California, Southern California, and like but also like there just seemed to be like something was gonna pop off like the way it did in the summer because everyone was like out of school.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
it seemed like that all the time when I was a teenager. Like it just seemed to be happening all the time,
Okay,
and so it felt like like things could go wild anytime. So it was always like summertime and always like that.
that makes sense. Yeah, that so many good lines. There was one about the cheekbones. There's the singing. There's the moms who always seem to be the victims, or the ones
Yeah.
picking everybody else up, right? And like the innocence of like the ice cream truck and a couple coins for that.
Hmm.
Man,
Hmm.
there's so much going on there.
Thanks. Yeah.
Man, how you feeling?
Good. I was thinking that poem, like the down poem, I wrote it one summer as like I challenged myself to write like the longest poem I could write,
Mm,
and I basically was trying to pack everything from like what it looked like, what like main images at
mm-hmm.
that time in my thinking looked like to me in that poem, until like everything you said was like packed with all this stuff. I was just trying to throw it all in there and see if it could work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt, it definitely worked.
Thanks.
Eh, What do you think? Maybe a section from the elegy.
Yeah. Oh, let me see which section I want to read. Um, I know which one. I think. I think. I think I'll read section 6 and then maybe 10 because it's like a weird 21.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah. So this is LG with roll call. It's a multi-section poem, and this is section 6, confession. In my attempt to escape vanishing, I left and thus defeated my own purpose. I told friends I'm going to Minnesota because I could not stay, because I could not say I can't be here. And not knowing the place, they could only imagine me going into the state's large name. I'm the one who left, so I can't say for sure what became of those boys. I wasn't there. The further away I am, the harder I look for home. And section 10 is the annotated 6-word memoir. My homies still call me Remick. So the word Remick has the annotation. It's been years, families in tow. We bring brew, food, and fire. We present the small children we've made, have them shake hands. Our children, for whom we will be mysteries, look up at us, then at the clouds, which escape everyone. I emerge, dragging the old table from the backyard. The homies cheer, arms, exclamation points, beer spilled from plastic cups. We settle into seats, slide fingers across tabletop. Beneath dust, the sticky angles of lettering. Someone recalls my pant leg snagged on a fence, running from security in boxers, the fading slap of sneakers against street. Our laughter crosses out the evening. No one leaves. All night, our daughters chase crickets.
That next generation, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's like a way to say like we made it, and like look who, like here's what's gonna uh become the next thing after us.
Yeah. I mean, if you would be totally justified if you just retired and lived off this incredible, smash hit, your first one, but I know you're not going to. So what do you got?
And
What are you working on? What's coming up?
um everything that I'm working on is coming slowly, and my writing process is so different with 2 kids now. This is basically the only book that I will ever have without kids, right? And so
Yeah.
um I'm writing a lot of like drafts of poems. I'm writing I'm writing similar things about masculinity. I'm writing about homies still. I think my writing is changing even from reading this. Like certain the ways I talk about certain things and certain things I talk about is just like changing,
Mm.
which is interesting to see. Um, one of my homies from grad school had told me like you only have one first book, and like there's a certain rawness to your voice that you never get back after that first book. It just is that raw thing that you made as the first thing, you know. So this is like I really love that this is the thing that was the raw
Mm.
thing or whatever. But
Mm.
um I'm talking about fatherhood a lot in poems, and that's a really complicated thing for me. And but I'm really I'm writing and talking about stuff in the work that I say 5 years ago, I say 2 years ago, I wouldn't be able to even write about,
Yeah.
and like sometimes have trouble talking about. So it's like weird because I know that if it's gonna be like this for the next thing, then I'll have to talk about these things, and I don't know if I'm ready to entirely talk about them. But for some reason, I'm writing about them, which I think it's a good sign, right? To like totally just like I don't want to. Uh, I don't. I want to say everything that needs to be said, and I don't want my own sort of idea of trying to self-defend myself
Mm,
to stop me from writing something that's really true and real.
I get you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm writing about that in my poems. I have a nonfiction something project that I'm working on.
Okay.
I have a series of flash essays that's coming out in June
Nice.
from this lit mag called The Sun.
Mm,
They published me before, and so like it's like a series of like I think like 8 or 9 essays, but like each one is like 200 to 300 words. So it's like
mm,
a lot of tiny essays.
okay.
Um, in a way, it's like LG would roll call in that like it's
Right.
like these little moments. Um, but they're all these little moments that sort of build on to see this bigger picture
Hmm.
of fatherhood, basically,
Nice.
that I'm really excited and nervous about publishing. But I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Writing about fatherhood is hard, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I have not taken much of a stab at it, but I have not had found any success. It's just it's kind of like trying to find the entry point, man. I don't know.
Oh, I mean, I should. Yeah, I mean, if I will say that I first started trying to write about this like many years ago, and it was not working out.
Mm,
And I mean, it takes a long time for me to get something right.
sure.
So like, I'm glad that this thing I feel good about. I feel good enough about it
Mm-hmm.
to put it out for publication, but I'm also still like nervous about thinking and talking about it. It's good though. It's good for me, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes you the great writer. An incomplete list of names is through. Remind me of the press, the company,
Beacon, yeah, Beacon
Beacon
Press.
Press, and you're on Instagram, but not Twitter. Am I right?
Yeah, Twitter like overwhelms me,
You're
but
smart. You're smart.
I'm on Instagram for sure.
And find you. Was it Remek?
It's actually it's like before I was even like really gonna be a writer. So it was like Michael Polo Polo dot as in spelled out DOT and then
Yeah, that's
one.
right. That's right. So Kendrick stole the whole K dot. He stole that from you.
Nah, I wish.
Oh man. All right. You're not getting royalties from that. All right.
Nah.
Man, it was like I said, I was so looking forward to talking to you. The time flew. It was like you on
Yeah,
that. It was like you on that first piece, 20 minutes or 2 hours. Which one was it?
yeah. I
Right,
appreciate this, man.
man. It was so cool, and hope it's not the last time. And
Nah.
we'll talk when the next collection or before, or see you at I can't think of the name, the not MLA, but the conference up
Oh,
in Fresno
AWP.
next year. AWP, something like that, man. It's been
Are you
such
gonna
a
be there?
pleasure. I'm trying to be there next year, man.
Cool, man. Keep in touch because I missed it this year because my son was born a couple weeks early. But
Ah, come on, what an excuse that. Come on.
I know, but
Yeah.
like I really want to go, and I love that conference,
Yes.
and then it's just like I like seeing the people, so it'd be cool to meet you in person.
There you go, man. I
Yeah,
wish you nothing but luck, man. Thanks for opening up the lab to me and opening up your thoughts, and just wish you good
yeah,
luck in the future. Thanks again.
yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
What a pleasure it's been to speak to Michael Torres. Thank you for listening to episode 121. You can now subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review while you're there. You can ask for the podcast by name using Alexa, find it on Stitcher, and I'm really minimizing the last two more recently, Spotify and Amazon Music if you have to. But follow me on Instagram where I'm at Chills at Will Podcast, or on Twitter at Chills at Will PO1. You can watch this and other episodes on YouTube, subscribing to the Chills at Will podcast channel while you're there. This is a passion project of mine, a DIY operation, and I'd love for your help in promoting what I'm convinced is a unique and spirited look at an often ignored art form. The intro song for the Chills at Will podcast is Wind Down Instrumental, and the other song played on the episode is Hoops Instrumental by Matt Whitehour, and both songs are used through archesaudio.com. Please tune in for episode 122 with Sonora Reyes, the author of the forthcoming contemporary young adult novel, The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. They write fiction full of queer and Latinx characters in a variety of genres, with current projects in both kidlit and adult categories. Sonora is also the creator and host of the Twitter chat, hashtag QPOCC chat, Queer People of Color chat, a monthly community building chat for queer writers of color. And this episode airs May 10th. For now, thanks again for listening, and I hope that these quarantine days bring you texts by writers with mad skills like Michael Torres, whose work, like an incomplete list of names, gives you chills at